So a chance meeting in New Zealand in 1997 between Martin Fowler and I actually led to my being a part of the Manifesto group. Agile movement started with values and principles and then brought methodologies along as an implementation of those values and principles. And I don't think we know where it's going to go yet, how it's going to impact both our lives and our businesses. But I think the change is going to be something that we need to prepare for. So I see that as the biggest challenge. I never planned my career, but I was always open to different opportunities that might come up. I think that's the thing that kind of saved me. So I think people can't really have a career plan anymore. There's too many boulders out there.
Hello everyone, welcome to Untrapping Product Teams. Today is a very special episode. We have Jim Highsmith here. He is the co-author of Agile Manifesto and the author of many books, being one of them, this one here I'm holding in my hand, Wild West Agile. I think Jim is the person on earth who has been the longest doing this kind of things, and I don't know how he doesn't get tired after 6 decades. He even decided to come out of retirement to help the world again. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Jim.
Nice to be here, David. I appreciate the opportunity.
That's great. So Jim, you have been doing this thing for 6 decades. I cannot even imagine. That's such a long time. And one of the curiosities I had in my mind, I read your book here, and when I was going through, I noticed that many things you wrote there, although they were from the past, like decades ago, they're still present today. Why does that happen?
It's interesting. I was reading through looking for something in my 2009 project management book, Agile Project Management. This was 3 or 4 weeks ago, and so I happened to flip to this page, which had a diagram or image of documentation guidelines, Agile documentation guidelines. And I thought, oh, that looks kind of interesting. So I posted it, thinking it would not be very useful to people. Well, I got 80,000 impressions on that.
Oh,
And, and so it's interesting. I think I think they don't have a sense of history about Agile. And so I think that when somebody goes and shows, some things that happened in the past that address some of the issues that they have today, they appreciate it. And hearing from some of the authors of the manifesto about how they're thinking about it today, if there are people like Alistair Coburn and John Kern and Mike Cohn, although Mike wasn't a signatory, he was very heavily involved in the beginning. And I think they just appreciate some of that history and understanding that some of these issues were addressed many years ago and they kind of fall by the wayside. They need to be reimagined or rebrought to the front. I've been surprised at some of the things that I've written in LinkedIn that have gotten really high response that I thought were just kind of old hat.
that's what I noticed also, because there's some things I write, and of course I don't have anything close to your experience, but some things I used to see in 2016, and I sometimes reflect and refrain from posting that. But when I post, it speaks to many people. Although I thought, wow, this is a little bit obvious, there's nothing magical behind it, and so on. But still, it triggers people a lot. There's a simple thing, the difference between the PM and the PO, or this kind of things about velocity, estimation, planning, and so on. But I want to hear from you, like, what are the most common challenges you still see present today?
Well, I think the common challenge today is getting ready for the next 5 to 10 years, which is going to see massive changes due to artificial intelligence and other technologies like biotech coming down the path. And I don't think we know where it's going to go yet, how it's going to impact both our lives and our businesses. But I think the change is going to be something that we need to prepare for. So I see that as the biggest challenge. I've been digging into artificial intelligence. I'm just kind of a neophyte at it now, but I've been digging into it for about a year now, and I'm convinced there's going to be a big change. One of the futurists calls it a super cycle of change because you've got AI and you've got biotech, and those things interact with each other, and some of the other stuff that we've been doing technology wise. And so when I look at reimagining Agile, I look at going back to basics, which is what are some of the basic fundamental values and principles of Agile? And are they still applicable? How do we need to extend those? So, for example, I think people like you have extended the basic framework or the basic values of Agile into your work on product management. There are different words, but they convey the same intent. So one of the things I really liked about your book was that it only mentioned, I think, the word Agile like 2 times in the whole book. But the intent of what you were talking about is very agility oriented.
Yeah, that's true. And I connect very much what you say, getting ready for the next thing, what is going to happen during the next 5 to 10 years. And when I wrote the book, I connect very much to Agile. And what I wanted this book to convey is to connect the world, because I started seeing some things like Agile people and product people. And I think the beauty is in the overlap. So I said, how do I get to the overlap? And I noticed some people trying to bash Agile frameworks and trying to say, Scrum is bad, this is bad, this is bad. And I said, I'm not going to go into that, but I'm going to think about what is the mindset? What is the principle we need to follow? Or what are the principles? There are many we need to follow. Because once this is right, then we can adapt the process. We can change it. But if we start with the process and so on, then we are missing the point. So that's what I strive to convey as a message in the book, without telling people how to do the work, but what they should be thinking when they are doing the work, or what they should be considering, and then they can figure out what makes sense in their scenario.
Yeah, I think context makes a big difference. And a couple of weeks ago, I wrote something about. I looked at all the stuff on LinkedIn, or I've been following it. Some of the negative comments about Agile, they tend to be about specific frameworks or models. And so one of the things that I talk about in the book you just put up was the difference between methods, methodology, and mindset. And Pete Behrens, who I'm working with now, gave me a good analogy the other day. He said, how many of you go to movies? I go to movies. You stream them on TV via Netflix or Disney. Yeah. Did you used to use discs that were mailed in the mail? Yes. Did you used to use from Blockbuster, if you're really older, VCR? And from VCR to disc to streaming, those are the containers for the movies. The content is the same. It's a movie's content, but the containers are changing to fit the technology of the time. If you look at methods and mindset, those are the key things. Do you practice test-driven development? Do you practice morning stand-ups? Do you practice iteration planning? So those are the practices or the methods. And then the methodologies are like the container. You have different containers for different purposes. And so I don't see anything wrong with any of the containers. I think some work better than others, and they ought to be applied to a particular situation. But I think we ought to stop complaining about the containers and talk about the real advantage, what people have seen as the accomplishments of Agile and the disappointments of Agile. Not succeed, fail, but accomplishments and disappointment. And so I wrote about what some of the disappointments are, regardless of container.
And that's something that people fail to look at, because it's very easy to blame Agile. But one thing that I learned throughout my career so far is maybe we need to rephrase. Like, instead of saying Scrum failed us, what about saying how I practice Scrum failed? Because there is the how I do it. So that requires a lot of humility to say it, but most of the times the driver is one of the biggest cause of the accident, not the car. The car might be fine, it depends how you drive it. So you need to understand how you use the vehicle and which vehicle to use when. So I like this analogy of containers because then you can think, what would fit me here? And what I try saying all the time is you need to understand the game you're playing, right? So what is the game you are in? And then understand the card you have. And there are different ways of playing this because one of the ways is you complain about all the cards you don't have and then you just don't play the game. You keep complaining. I don't have this card, so this is missing. I cannot do my job and so on. Or you look at the cards you have in your hand and then you make the best move possible. And then maybe you win another card that you're missing, but you keep progressing with what you have. And that's it.
Well, one of the things that I think has happened is I call it the Jerry Weinberg's law of raspberry jam. The wider you spread it, the thinner it gets. And I think we've done that with capability in terms of Agile. So I think you've got some people out there who are probably teaching some of these frameworks, don't have a lot of experience doing it. They have some basic knowledge, but I talk about capability, and capability to me is a function of knowledge. So you have the knowledge about stuff, you have some experience with it, so you have some experience to balance that knowledge and use that knowledge. Then the other one, which people often don't get, is decision making capability. Do you have the capability of making skill of making good decisions based on the knowledge and the experience that you've had? And so I know people, for example, who are great analysts that couldn't make a decision to save their life because they analyze everything to death and they come up with these great big lists of, and they say, and they can't sort it out as to what's the most important thing to make a decision on. So I think that capabilities are too thin, and so I used to have some objections to the certification process, but I lost that battle, and so I look at the most of the certification processes and badges that you get today. I look at them as scout merit badges. They're worth something because they say that you've gained some knowledge, but you haven't gained experience or decision making capability. That's what really brings out the total capability of whatever you're trying to study. So I think we've got to catch up on experience because Agile has expanded so fast into so many places that you've basically got just above novices teaching novices, and just above novices coaching novices. And the more experience they get, the better off we'll be.
Yeah. That has been my complaint about the certificate industry, as I call it. I see that there are great trainers out there who can help the novice learn because these trainers, they do have the experience, they have the expertise and the experience, so they can teach the others. But as the demand became super high, then the offer decreased the quality, I would say, because there are many people who are searching for the certificate, and the market also is saying like, if you don't have this badge, I'm not gonna talk to you.
Right.
So
Right.
show me your credentials and I talk to you. So that, of course, the market adapted to provide badges for a certain price faster. And that led to a situation where someone is trained to be a product owner by someone who has never been a product owner. That is where I see the problem. Because then the market says, oh, okay, so you have the badge, let me talk to you and maybe hire you.
Yeah. Well, let me give you an example of something. When in about 2004, a group of us that were going to the Agile conferences, and I helped establish the first Agile conference, got to thinking about the fact that the Agile community was really not very much supportive of project management.
Mm-hmm.
And so we formed a separate organization called the Agile Project Leadership Network, which was primarily project managers who said, it's not that we don't need any project managers, it's that we need a different type of project manager. We need Agile project managers. And we decided at the time, through a much debate at the board level, not to do certification. So some of the people on our board who didn't like that decision went off to help PMI set up their Agile certification program. And what happened to the APLN is because of that, we actually went out of business because we didn't have a funding model. If I had it all to do over again, I would probably bite my tongue and go through this and provide Agile project management certification process. So it does serve a purpose. And like you said, are we going to tell people they can't have it? I want to buy a certification process, or I want to buy a Scrum Master certification. Or are we going to tell them, no, you can't have that because we don't think it's a good idea for you to have one? It's
Yeah, that's the thing. People want to level up their knowledge. So let's help them level up the knowledge. But it's a combination, as you said. There is the capability and there's the ability to use that knowledge. So it comes with experience and so on. So some things you need to learn by doing. And it's a question like, can we prepare these people for reality in the market? And as you said, like there's a next thing coming for the next 5 to 10 years. And for me, I would say that we need Agile more than ever because there is a discussion. Agile is dead. Everything is dead. We know it all. So what comes next? And what I say is, this discussion is not a point. The question is, there's change ahead of us. And how fast can we adapt to reality? We simply don't know what is ahead of us. And being agile is this part. Using our available knowledge to step into the unknown and adapt. So facing reality as fast as possible.
And one of the things I think is going to be really important is absorbing new knowledge and experience. And one of the questions is going to be, what knowledge about what? You know, if you get it, once you start digging into artificial intelligence a little bit, there's about 50,000 rat holes you can go down very quickly. So what part of AI do I need to learn as a manager? What part of AI do I need to learn as a software developer? What do I need to use as a product mode? And so we're going to have to be very much in control or direct our own learning, as well as work with companies that we work for in terms of their learning. But I think we're going to have to speed that up. So, for example, when you look at gaining experience, you can ask the question, are there ways of gaining experience more quickly using AI? And the answer is yes, there are some things that you can do. You can't completely replace real experience, but you can provide some experience. So, for example, I'm a novice coder and I'm sitting there writing some Java code or some Python code. And then I say to my bot, check that code out to see. They say, yeah, you should have used this pattern rather than that pattern. So that's a way that you're actually gaining some experience without having to actually work with somebody else. Now, at some point, you probably need to talk to somebody who is really an expert as opposed to just your partner bot. But those are the kinds of things that are going to come up in the future. And AI is coming. So there's two poles of thought about AI. One is it's going to be so exciting and do great things for our world, and the other one is just going to destroy our world. And we get to participate in which of those things happen. I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle, but we've got to participate. And so the more we understand about how these technologies can impact our businesses and our world, the better off we'll be. So I've one of the things I've been trying to do is be framework and methodology independent. I don't care what you call it. I don't care which framework you do, just so you're doing something to increase your agility over time.
Yeah. And about AI, it is how you perceive it, right? Because I had a talk with Shiva, she recently, and she wrote a book about it. She called also Reimagine, but she focused on generative AI products. And one of the things she said, like, AI is not something to replace you. AI is a co-pilot and should amplify your potential if you use it right. And one skill that is becoming more and more valuable, it is the prompt engineering. So how good of a prompt you can write? You mentioned about the coding and so on. With my book here, I use AI to test the book. For example, I would ask like, how would an experienced product manager with 5 years of experience working in a company like that react to this piece of content? What would they get as a takeaway? And then I ask the same, What would an agile coach perceive from this? So that gave me perspectives from different angles. And when I disagreed with AI, I asked the question, break down how you came to this so I can understand. So within this prompt, I could see some things there, and then I learned some stuff. So I could improve the content based on that. Imagine now if I would have to talk to all of these people, I would just take very long to do that.
Right.
And I just
So
see that behind the computer.
so you basically had a team, and some of your team were your AI bots, and some of your team were people like myself and some other people. Just like when I wrote my last book, I didn't really have an AI that I used, but I would today. And so you have people that help you, and you have bots that help you, and you've got to figure out how to manage your team.
Yeah. So exactly, I had my beta readers. In total, there were 6 rounds, 30 people in the end. So they provided feedback and a tool, helped this book, that was the tool, and I would manage those feedback and see what they were engaging, where they were losing things, and so on. But they would give me feedback on the structure, on something. But I wanted to see more like on the big picture. I wanted to step back and start looking at that. And then I used AI. So I had to look at different perspectives, and I remained as a pilot. So I had to decide which title to pick. How would I put this headline? Which message to convey? But AI helped me sharpen it.
Right. And I think that's the way, I mean, I write differently today than I did 6 months ago in terms of my interaction with a couple of different AI bots. And it's real interesting. You know, your area is product management. So I was a product manager in 1986, and I was a product manager for a methodology company. So we sold methodologies, and we sold training, and we sold uh, aids. And I had no idea what product management was all about. Just like my first job, I was a project manager, and I had no idea what project management was all about. It was just getting started. And so, as a product manager, most of my work was working with vendors and working with our people to develop the product. And one of the things that I saw, there were product managers that just beginning to be used in software companies, but not in mainline industrial companies. And that really began to change in about the mid 90s when the internet came in. So the internet caused several different things, one of which was to refocus development effort from internal systems to external systems. So all of a sudden, you went from having a captive audience of your own company employees to having a non-captive audience, which were all your customers out there. And it really generated the need for product management to be much more involved. And that's why it was specifically talked about in Scrum as a role as a product owner. And it got sort of one of the things we used to run up against is when we first installed Agile in an organization, is the software development team would do a pretty good job. And then it was really hard getting the testing organization to integrate into the developer. And then it was harder to get the product owner type information from the user community. So those things came together, but each one took time and effort to have them integrated into the development process.
Mm-hmm. It speaks a lot to me, this experience you had, because my first role into the product world, I also didn't know what a product manager was. And actually, I got this role after an English course. I wanted to improve
Nobody
my
else
English.
did either.
Yeah, I guess so. What happened is I wanted to learn English. I didn't have money to travel abroad, so I went to an immersion course in the town around. And at the end, I had to present something. Back then, I was a software engineer, and then I presented what I was working on there. Someone after this presentation knocked my back and said, "Hey, I want to talk to you." We didn't know who the other people were, what they did. We were there to practice English. And then it turned out that this guy was a CEO of a big company in Sao Paulo. And he looked at me and said, "Hey, I'm a finance guy. I don't understand anything about IT. But I like how you explain things. You make complex things easy to understand. I want to offer you a job as a product manager." And then I looked at him and I said, "I'm delighted. and I'm inclined to learn more about it. But there's just one tiny problem. I have no idea what a product manager is. And then he looked at me, you don't need to know. You are good with communication, and that's the only thing that matters. You will figure the rest out. Just communicate with people, and that's gonna be fun. And that's how I moved from my hometown of 20,000 people to São Paulo of 20 million, and then it changed everything. But I got into that, and I struggled with this part you mentioned. Software developers would do a great job there, but then testing this was hard. And how would I connect the feedback from real users? There was a pressure from internal stakeholders to do what they wanted, which many times was unrelated to what end users needed. And I had to figure that out, this equation. Of course, in the beginning, I didn't figure out, so I delivered loads of things all stakeholders were in love with, and users couldn't care less about it.
Yeah, that's happened to me a time or two.
Yeah.
In fact,
And
early on, so when I started, the tech stack was 3D. It was the operating system, the compiler, and job control language on an IBM machine. And so I built this system I was working in a refinery at the time in Houston, and I built a maintenance management system for the maintenance people. And it was just a kind of a reporting system. And so I showed them all the reports that I generate. They say, those are good. I like that. I like that. And then I handed them the input forms. And they said, what do you mean? What do you mean? I said, the data's got to get in there somewhere. And they said, no, we don't want to fill out those forms. And so it just died right there. About 3 months after, it just crashed because I didn't want to fill out the
oh,
input forms.
yeah, that happens. That happens. It's kind of crazy. But Jim, one thing, you have been on this game for 6 decades and you had retired. You were just enjoying your retirement. What made you come back to fight all of this mess that is happening?
Well, a couple of things. What really happened is I retired and COVID hit, and so I was, sitting at home a lot, trying to figure out what to do, as a lot of us were, and started writing a memoir, basically for my grandkids. And the more I wrote, the more I thought, well, maybe some of this stuff would be useful for other people. And so I expanded it into a book about my 60-year career. And one of the things that if you look back, I took some major pivots in my career, and they were what I'd call adventurous pivots. So I went from being a software development manager for a utility company in Atlanta to being the head of sales and marketing for a startup in Topeka, Kansas. I commuted from Atlanta to Topeka, Kansas for 2.5 years
Phew.
because my family did not want to move to Kansas. Um, so things just kind of happened and so that was a major move, but it really reestablished my career path for the rest of my career. And so people have to kind of look at opportunities that come up. And to me, I never planned my career, but I was always open to different opportunities that might come up. I think that's the thing that kind of saved me. And so I think people can't really have a career plan anymore. There's too many boulders out there. So it's navigating the boulder field rather than having a plan. But I think openness to adventurous opportunities is really something that people have to kind of look at. And because for me, it kept it exciting for me. And now as I said, last year, I've been really into this artificial intelligence. First of all, reimagining Agile because I saw too many people that were sort of bashing Agile. And I thought they're bashing it for the same unreasonable reasons that they were bashing it 20 years ago. Uh, and some of them were new reasons. But I said, let's see what we can do in terms of getting back to the basics of that. And then moving forward to the future, I've really been excited about getting into the artificial intelligence and and trying to understand how software development and agility were going to change as a result of the new technologies. So those things have kind of kept it new for me. And the fact that I've got a number of friends who have hobbies. They have their photography or something. They have hobbies. And I realized my hobby was work.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I cannot connect to that because I started blogging also around COVID. So things just, you know, they started going in certain direction. I didn't have a plan either. I didn't plan to write a book. I had time and I said, what if I share my mistakes? What if I share whatever I learned? It was a conversation I had with my wife, and I kept doing that. And the more honest I shared things, the more it resonated with people. And then I connected with more people. And I kept doing that. And that became my hobby. And my hobby is about writing about product management, reading books about this, talking about this, going to conference and so on. I have a full-time job, very demanding, but my free time, I invest a big chunk into that. And it's crazy because sometimes I give trainings at night. And then they start at 7 p.m., go until 10 p.m. virtual. And guess what happened after? I'm loaded with energy. I'm supposed to be tired, but I'm loaded with energy.
Yeah.
Because I like this move and so on. So I connect with you. And one thing about this book here that I like very much is the attitude. So you said about adventures, doing bold moves, but one of the core things that I saw here was the non-conformist attitude. So you said that you were non-conformist throughout your life, and that led to many things, challenge and so on. So maybe you could share a few stories about it.
Well, my original nonconformity act had to do with my dad. And so I was in engineering school during the early 60s. And I kind of came home one time, and my dad said, "Why don't you come to the office with me and I'll tell you what engineering is all about." You can talk to some of the other engineers in the firm. He was a civil engineer. I was in electrical engineering. So I said, "Great." And so I drove down to his office, and I had my suit and a tie on and my, dressed up, and went into his office. This was in like 63 or 64. And he was aghast. He said, "Where's your white shirt?" Because I had a light yellow shirt on. And so that was my nonconformity starting out. But I've always been a little bit like that. And part of it is I've also been an adventurer out of the doors. So I've raced motorcycles, I've climbed mountains, I've raced century bike rides, I've sailed in regattas and brought up the rear in the races. So I've done a whole raft of different outdoor things that are kind of fed my sense of adventure. And so I carried that over into my work history.
Yeah, and it is about being bold, being courageous, and following your intuition. You may have no idea what's gonna happen, right? You made some move from. You could say that you had for sure a career. You had stayed there as a manager. You were in a place you could continue to grow, but you decided to go to something totally different. And this kind of thing of not planning the career, listening to opportunities, taking risks, I think that's what makes fun out of it, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, during the 90s, I was doing a preliminary work. I called it radical software development. And then finally I got around to calling it adaptive software development. But I was a lone voice in the world, I thought. And then I kind of started finding another couple of people, read some of Ken Schwaber's stuff. And this is just how, quote, accidental things can happen. So I was at a conference in San Francisco in 1997, and a guy from New Zealand came up to me and he said, "Would you come to New Zealand and speak at our software development conference?" So I called a friend of mine and said, "Is this guy legit?" And they said, "Yes, he is." And so I went to New Zealand to speak at this conference. Ended up, the guy who ran the conference was the head of a company, and we ended up being fast friends. And I worked in New Zealand and Australia quite a bit after that. And at that conference, I met Martin Fowler. And so Martin really connected with some of the stuff that I was talking about. And he introduced me to Kent Beck. And then Kent Beck and I exchanged manuscripts before Extreme Programming was released, and before adaptive software development was released. We exchanged manuscripts, and I got pulled into the extreme programming mainstream. and eventually into the manifesto meeting. So a chance meeting in New Zealand in 1997 between Martin Fowler and I actually led to my being a part of the manifesto group.
Wow, that's that's crazy. That's something, and you and all of these people, I dare say, it just transformed. You started a huge move that transformed how software is created, how people collaborate, how they work. And I would even say that you give hope of creating something better, because before that, and I still see in some places struggling with agility, there's a lot about predictability, kind of talking about the work instead of doing the work. And then they started introducing a way of let's do the work and learn what it's going to help and not, and so on, and all of this movement. And how do you feel about all of this contribution that you brought to the world? Because it transformed in a good way. Many people may complain and so on, but I would say we would be way worse without the Agile Manifesto.
Well, we never thought it would go like this. I'm not sure what we thought about, but we just knew that what was working in the past was not working very well for the future. And so we got together, and I have been in hundreds of meetings over my career, and that was a very, very unique group of people that happened to get together at a particular point in time and agreed on a direction and wrote something down, and never thought it would take off like it did. And it was really humbling to be a part of that. Uh, Not too long ago, about a year ago, one of the 17 wrote an email to all of us and saying, we would like to get together again. And if we did get together, which I don't think we'd ever do because there's too many people that have gone in opposite directions, I don't think we could ever agree on something again. There was a particular time and a particular place for that manifesto to occur. And there were some other movements that were kind of parallel. There was a movement in management ranks. There was some movement in some of the other engineering ranks to be more agile, more flexible. But I think the software development community took off faster. And if I look back at the one thing that separated agile movement from the movement before, which was the structured development movement, it was values and principles.
Mm-hmm.
Agile movement started with values and principles and then brought methodologies along as an implementation of those values and principles. If I look back at the things that came out in the 80s and 90s, it was all about the process and the documentation and the tools, and very little about values and principles. They were all sort of implied rather than explicit. And I think making those values explicit was the big difference between what came before and what came after.
It is. It is a considerable difference. And even today, it's quite relevant to 2 decades after. Sometimes we start talking. Many people ask me, like, which tools do you recommend? How do you set your workflow in Jira? And then I start with the principle, it's individual interactions over tools and processes. So what are you prioritizing? And it's very easy to move towards tools, because today we have even way more tools than we had in the 2000s, and they are quite powerful, but it depends what you are going to do with them.
There's an organization, I forget the website, what it's called now, but they have the top 10,000 artificial intelligence tools.
Well,
the top 10,000.
The top 10,000. Oh my God.
And the community is the Agile community is so much bigger now. So for example, you can do a Google search, and you can come up with people who list out the top 100 Scrum books.
Mm-hmm.
So the top 50 product management books. Back in 2001 and 2002, there was my book, Kent Beck's book, and there were a couple of others that were coming along. And so the fact that the communities have split into multiple different parts is a pretty natural thing. So the fact that you've got people over here that are more structured, and people over here that are more adaptable and more flexible is probably just a normal distribution of how technologies and trends get dispersed into the marketplace. So I'm not surprised that any of that stuff has happened. What I was a little surprised was the vehemence of some of the people who were anti, and so that's one of the reasons I got back involved.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I still see that some people have very strong claims that it's gone. Now it comes the next one, and this gets quite a lot of attention for different reasons and so on. Sometimes people want to sell something. They don't want. Sometimes people want to bash, but I barely see someone who wants to bring something new. They want to criticize, but okay. So what is the next thing then? Let's talk about the next thing.
And it's interesting in a way that some, not all, but some of the people who are bashing Agile the most are also making their living using it.
That's true. I would connect to some people who do that.
Your Agile is bad. My Agile is much better. Go my way.
Yeah. Your Agile is super bad. Don't do this Agile. This other Agile here, this is good. This is good. But Agile is dead. So how do you could combine this thing? But what I see, if what I see today is a need of stepping back and going back to the basics, as you said. I think that the basics are in the wrong place now, or they disappeared. I still see some things happening. How do we ensure we are gonna meet the deadlines? I see this question. How do we make estimates more precise so we know when we are gonna deliver this? And these questions, they are just, I think, misleading. I think estimate by definition of any dictionary will say that it's inaccurate by default, but still people want more precise estimates. They don't want estimates, they want actually predictions. And I don't think that works in software development.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have some sort of estimate or guesstimate as to how long it's going to take or where it's going to end. But I've done fixed date contracts using Agile. The key thing is you've got to have an organization where you can negotiate. You can't fix all the dimensions. Scope, schedule, and cost. If you fix all three of these, you give me nothing that I can adjust, and you can't tell me that things aren't going to change during the life of a project or a product development. And so you've got to be willing to negotiate that. One of the things that I found in the mid 2000s is a lot of teams where they were asked to be flexible and adaptable and changeable because that was what Agile was supposed to give them, and that's what they sold to upper management. And so upper management says, yes, we like all that flexibility, but here's the iron triangle. You still have to deliver to time, cost, and budget. I mean, cost and schedule and scope. And so you had a measurement system that was at odds with the process. And so I developed something called the Agile Triangle with value, quality, and constraints. And the constraints were scope, schedule, and cost. And that brought that better matched the idea of measurement system with the process you were using. So I think those things are some of the organizational kinds of things that need to change. And I think the organizational change around software development and IT is the next kind of place we have to go. If you look at Pete Behrens and I did a little looking at several of the major transformation things that have gone on in the last 20 years, all the way from Toyota's lean production system to Agile to big data to digital transformation. And in every one of those, there were some real successes. There were some real disappointments, and probably bigger disappointments than there were with Agile. And when you got through and you analyzed them, the big difference was leadership and management.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't change leadership and management, and particularly the mindset and culture, you're not going to make major inroads into organizations. And I think that's the next horizon, doing that better.
That's the next thing that needs to happen. And one of the aspects I see on leadership, I connect very much to one sentence from Simon Sinek, where he says that the role of a great leader is not to come up with all the great ideas, but to create a space where all the great ideas can happen. And that's what I'm missing now. So do we have leaders that are focusing on creating the space and providing the direction? The leader does need to provide the direction. Where do we want to land? What is our vision? Why are we doing what we do?
There are some of those around. A lot of them are obviously in the high tech area, but there's some, for example, the new CEO that came in at Bayer,
Mm-hmm.
big old line company, does aspirin and all other kinds of medical stuff. And they're completely revamping their management structure and something that they call DSO, and I forget their acronym right now, but they've been in the press recently about what they've done in terms of, for example, expanding the span of control for their managers from 3 to 5 to 15 to 20. You don't do that without changing how you manage people. And one of the interesting things that I saw recently was the CEO of NVIDIA gave a presentation at their conference. And he's the CEO, and he said, I have 50 people reporting to me.
Whew.
You know,
Wow.
that's a special case, but you don't get flattened hierarchies unless you do that different span of control. And you have to manage in a different way. You can't micromanage. The last thing you can do in that environment is micromanage. You've got to
Yeah.
manage through intent. Here's what I intend. Here's what I'd like for you to do. You figure out how to do it, and come back to me. When it's done. And it's very much you are empowering them to do certain things, to have a sense of autonomy. So to me, between layers of management, you've got to have autonomy, accountability, and alignment. Alignment around goals, alignment around who makes decisions. And once you have those three things, you can navigate between layers pretty easy. If you've got 15 layers
Mm-hmm.
of management, that's very difficult to do.
Yeah.
So, so I know a handful or two handfuls of executives who have made that transition, but there's a huge number of people out there and organizations where that's going to be really difficult.
Yeah. And that's the core. Lead by intent. And then you see how people can figure out how to do it. You don't need to tell them how to do their job. You need to say the intent, and then they will figure it out. And you see how they progress and provide feedback. I think that's the core. But it is easier said than done. It requires a lot of change. And if you are on the good and old command and control, that's something frightening for this kind of leaders.
Yeah.
And Jimmy, we are coming to the end of our conversation. Is there anything else you want to leave to those watching or listening to this chat here full of insights?
Well, I think do things that excite you. I mean, like I've done a bunch of different things. I've been a project manager. I've been a development manager. I've been a VP of consulting. I've been a director of a project management practice. So I've done a variety of different things over my career. And each one of them was a little bit kind of an exciting change. So, for example, I just about finished writing my book, and I was at a particular conference put on by a company called the Cutter Consortium. And I was speaking at one of their panels. And I happened to sit down with the VP of marketing and development. And we got to talking, and she was asking me what I like to do, and we got to talking. And turns out that one of their newsletters on software development, a 16-page newsletter that came out monthly, so it was an in-depth look at a particular topic. They needed an author for it, and so it was another one of those chance meetings. I happened to go to this conference. We happened to sit down together. We happened to discuss what we were each needed. And I ended up for 2 years writing an in-depth software development newsletter every month. And so it's things like that you kind of keep the excitement going. I guess the other thing that I would mention is that one of the groups, I think it was a Business Agility Institute, did a study 6 months ago or so, and they looked at what top skills were needed or asked for by companies. number two skill was technology. The number one skill was communications. And so I think that's been a part of my life that I think is really important. And I think for anybody that's up and coming, work on your communication skills as well as your technical skills.
Wonderful advice. Wonderful. So you need to find what excites you. This speaks a lot to me because I connect. Many things happened to me over the last 3 years. Many things. Because I shared my ideas, because I went out to conference, because I talked to people, because I shared things that maybe I shouldn't have shared. They were too audacious, a bit loud, and so on.
Yeah.
But in the end, I connected to people, connect to you through some of my writing and so on. It is so exciting. And the more you do what excites you, the more opportunities you get, right?
But one of the things I found when I wrote this book was that I connected with a lot of people that I hadn't talked to in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And this book is a combination history of software development and memoir. And the more I wrote on it, the more people said, put more of yourself in it, put more of yourself in it. And as you well know by now, it's a lot different writing about things than it is writing about you, yourself. And I had to get comfortable with writing, or I never got completely comfortable about writing for myself, about myself and kind of putting it out there. Uh, but that's a whole different approach. And in fact, I've changed my bio that I send out to people because it used to be sort of like the typical bio. I did this, I did this, I did that. And I've rewrote it to say, here's who I am as opposed to here's what I've done.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got some of both in there, but the main focus is I'm an adventurer, I'm a storyteller, and and some other things about me that are more about who I am than what I've done. So it's really changed my outlook.
It's a great tip. It's a great one. I think also people get a bit bored with seeing all of the achievements and so on, and sometimes it even frightens the audience. But when they see like who you are, it's easier to connect to you, and it drives some curiosity. Whoa, what does he have to say? What does he have to share? And of course, they will look at the other things you achieve, but who you are is something that helps people connecting.
Yeah, what I said was, if in fact you believe in the first value of agility, which is individuals and interactions, then you've got to build relationships with people. You build relationships with people by telling them who you are and letting them tell you who they are, as opposed to, I did this, wrote this many books, I worked in these many jobs. I mean, that's a part of it, but who are you? What do you believe in? What do you do for a hobby? What's your family situation like? What do you think about the world and where we are in it today? And the more of that you can get from somebody, the better off you understand them, and the better teammates you'll be.
Yes. And we start going more in this direction of stop separating the personal and the business professional sphere. So we are oneself. So we are not like there's a professional David and there is the personal David. No, there's David. So there will be days I'm sad. There are days I'm excited. And if I share openly what is happening with me, it's just easier to collaborate with the others because they don't need to second guess what is happening. Why do I have a bad mood? What is going on? And so on. Or why am I so excited? So be yourself and things will just follow. I have been trying to do more of that, not always succeeding, but I trying to remain true to myself. And then I don't get stressed actually when I manage to do that. Yeah. Great, Jim. Great talking to you. It has been a massive pleasure. Loads of knowledge. And I'm super grateful for everything you've done to the community. Also for my book. You helped a lot this book here. It got way better after your feedback and so on. And thanks a lot for that.
Thanks a lot. I really enjoyed talking to you. I really enjoyed your book. It was quite enlightening, and I love some of the stuff in there, some of the value-oriented stuff, and some of the getting rid of a backlog, and some stuff that really spoke to me.
Great. Thanks a lot. And Jim, for those listening, how should they reach out to you?
Well, the best way is probably through LinkedIn.
Great. Great. I will leave the link here. No worry about it. I will put there. And of course, they can read your books and they will understand a lot about you. Mainly the last book. It's awesome. I can only recommend that. Actually, the truth is, once I started reading, I couldn't hold myself. I went from beginning to the end because it was so exciting, seeing all of those things. And then I was, oh, but this was in the 70s, but I still see this today. Okay. And then it was a real history. And when you see the history, you can understand more things now. And you can see some ingredients you could bring to the game. So that's why I truly recommend this book. So thanks everyone. It was a pleasure. And don't forget to subscribe and also hit Jim there on LinkedIn and connect to him. Loads of knowledge. 60 decades. Thanks a lot. Let's rock.
Thanks, David.